Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. A Marine Corps colonel could make history. President Trump nominated Colonel Lorna Malloch to become Brigadier General of the Marine Corps. And if approved, she would be the first black female to serve in that capacity. Women make up just 8% of the Marines, but in 2012, officials launched a diversity campaign and expect to see an increase in the female ranks. Now, what do veterans in the Western Slope town of Montrose have in common? Well, it turns out quite a lot. Montrose is going above and beyond compared to most communities, reaching out to help veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan returning from the front lines. Welcome Home Montrose is a unique program that caught the eye of a former war correspondent and now author, Donna Bryson. She wrote Home of the Brave, and I recently sat down with her to talk about it.
Montrose came to my attention because I was interested in whether Americans were talking about or interested in the war on terror. And I'd seen a Denver Post article about a Montrose vet. It mentioned this project, it was then called Welcome Home Montrose, to help veterans reintegrate into civilian life. And I thought, well, someone's talking about the war somewhere in America. I was freelancing. I pitched an article about this project to Stars and Stripes, and it kind of went from there. I did the article with Stars and Stripes and then went on to do this book.
What do you mean when you say someone's talking about the war?
I've been a foreign correspondent for much of my career. I was in Cairo when the Twin Towers fell. Writing about the war on terror and hearing about it, discussing it, was so much part of my experience when I was overseas. Not just in the Middle East, but in Europe and in Africa. It's just when people meet an American, they want to know about America's role. And when I got back to the U.S. in 2012, settled in Denver, it just seemed to me that people weren't talking about it, and it was a void, something I was kind of curious about, wondering about. When I got to Montrose, I think I started to come to an answer. This idea that in smaller towns, in rural America, in troubled parts of America, so even in some inner city America, that's where we're finding the recruits for this war. And many other Americans aren't involved directly. They don't know anyone who's involved directly, but in Montrose, people do.
So it really speaks to the divide of big city versus small city?
And thriving economy versus struggling economy. Yes, all of those questions.
So what did you see then in Montrose that you weren't seeing in Denver?
I remember when I first went out to do one of my first interviews, I met with a fishing guide named Tim Kinney who had served. And he picked me up at I met him at his fishing shop, and we drove out to his house, and we drove by a house with a flag out front, and they said, they just had someone, a Marine, be deployed. You don't see that in Denver. You don't see that evidence in the landscape of people who have served, because there are fewer from big cities like Denver, and maybe we just don't decorate our landscape in the same way. So you saw the war. It was home for a lot of people. I also saw a lot of people, both civilians who had no connection to the military and vets from all wars, kind of coming together around this topic. And that was very interesting for me too, to see particularly the way vets still want to serve. I met some vets who had been terribly injured, terribly wounded at war, and had their careers cut short. They had planned to have a career in the military. They had seen it as planning to have a career serving, and they still wanted to serve. They wanted to find some way to give back to other vets, to their community, to their nation. I saw quite a bit of that too.
So really your book speaks to what a lot of communities feel, where they want to celebrate these people who have served in our armed forces, yet helping them find a place back home, right?
I think communities want to celebrate. I think people do want to acknowledge the sacrifices that people in the military have made. They're just not quite sure how. And the key, certainly what I discovered in Montrose, is just to ask, to have a conversation with the vet. I think sometimes we avoid it. Vets aren't necessarily want to talk about their war experience, but if you sit down and show an interest and show a willingness to listen and be patient and not judge, you're going to have a fascinating conversation.
So a lot of other communities are looking at your book and saying, we can do this, or we can follow this model. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what you're hearing?
Certainly that's what I'm hoping. I've spoken about the book kind of throughout Colorado, a lot in Denver, but I also went to San Antonio last week, going to Portland this coming week. People in Montrose would like to think of themselves as a model, and I think what's a model about it is this kernel, this idea of having a conversation. If you can talk about it, then you can decide what route you're going to take. And I often think it's fair to say that there are a lot of small communities that are already doing things for their vets. And I think the book might give people an opportunity to say, maybe we can talk to one another and learn from one another, even if we've already started down this path. There's some ideas we can share, some mistakes maybe we can warn you about. It's just having a conversation is what I'd like.
What's the best takeaway you have from speaking to so many veterans and seeing what's happening in our smaller communities?
Well, I think there's two things. One, vets have given a lot, and they have a lot left to give.
Right.
And I think if you look around your own community and you find someone who's doing 5 different things for the community, if you ask them, you might discover they're a vet. It may not be a vet of Iraq and Afghanistan. It may be Vietnam. It may be Korea. It may be, but there is this. It may be inculcated in them this idea that I can serve, that I can
and I should serve,
and I should serve, and they keep doing it. And probably the other thing I learned is that it is possible. I think Melanie Klein, who's the founder of what's now called the Welcome Home Alliance for Vets, said to me once that when you look around, it feels like if you leave your house, you're just going to have an argument, or there's going to be some kind of danger involved in going out and talking to your neighbors. Well, she went out and talked to her neighbors, and something extraordinary came out of it. And I think we have to be willing to take that chance to go talk to strangers and not be.
I love that idea. It makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Exactly. Donna Bryson, thank you so much. Fascinating. Home of the Brave is the book. It's on Amazon, and you'll find it lots of other places as well.
Your favorite independent bookstore.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you will find links to Donna's webpage at thedenverchannel.com/politicsunplugged. And by the way, she'll be hosting a book talk about Home of the Brave at the Community College of Denver later on this month. We thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you back here next Sunday for another edition of Politics Unplugged.